This video will ruin sleep forever. You will not look away. You will not breathe. And when it's over, you'll check your locks twice. This isn't just a random creepy encounter with a stranger in the woods. This is the kind of fear that shakes you to your very core. It starts small, a flicker in the distance, a shadow in the corner of your eye. But as the story unfolds, it becomes something far darker, far more sinister. The feeling of being watched, the sense that you're not alone in the woods, builds and builds until it culminates in a terrifying realization. What started as an innocent camping trip quickly spirals into an inescapable nightmare that no one could have predicted. When my kids were young, my wife Karen and I decided it was time to take them camping for the very first time. It was supposed to be a fun family getaway, a way to bond in the tranquility of nature, far from the distractions of city life. Ellie was 9 years old and Jack was 11. The excitement of exploring the wild, of being away from the modern world, was enough to make them practically bounce out of the car when we arrived at the site. We'd chosen a remote, secluded spot, an area we'd visited years before. It was nestled deep in the woods, off an old dirt road, far from any signs of civilization. I remember how peaceful it had been then. The air fresh and clean, the trees so thick it felt like a world of its own. It was a place where you could truly get away from everything. At least, that's what we thought. The peaceful silence was almost too perfect. The kind of silence that, after a while, starts to feel unnatural. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. That's when it happened. A faint scream, carried by the wind, cut through the night. It was distant, but unmistakably human. The scream wasn't one of joy or play. It was a scream of sheer terror. My heart dropped. I looked at Karen, who had gone pale, her eyes wide with worry. Neither of us had seen anyone all day. No one had come near our campsite. "Did you hear that?" Karen whispered, voice trembling. "Someone's in trouble." I froze, straining my ears to listen. The scream came again, closer this time. It wasn't like any scream I'd ever heard. There was something raw and desperate in it, like someone was being chased, trapped, or worse. The peaceful silence was almost too perfect, the kind of silence that, after a while, starts to feel unnatural. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. That's when it happened. A faint scream, carried by the wind, cut through the night. It was distant, but unmistakably human. The scream wasn't one of joy or play. It was a scream of sheer terror. My heart dropped. I looked at Karen, who had gone pale, her eyes wide with worry. Neither of us had seen anyone all day. No one had come near our campsite. "Did you hear that?" Karen whispered, voice trembling. "Someone's in trouble." I froze, straining my ears to listen. The scream came again, closer this time. It wasn't like any scream I'd ever heard. There was something raw and desperate in it, like someone was being chased, trapped, or worse. Silence was almost too perfect. The kind of silence that, after a while, starts to feel unnatural. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. That's when it happened. A faint scream, carried by the wind, cut through the night. It was distant, but unmistakably human. The scream wasn't one of joy or play. It was a scream of sheer terror. My heart dropped. I looked at Karen, who had gone pale, her eyes wide with worry. Neither of us had seen anyone all day. No one had come near our campsite. "Did you hear that?" Karen whispered, voice trembling. "Someone's in trouble." I froze, straining my ears to listen. The scream came again, closer this time. It wasn't like any scream I'd ever heard. There was something raw and desperate in it, like someone was being chased, trapped, or worse. I grabbed the flashlight from beside me and stood up. "Stay with the kids," I called Karen. "I'll check it out." Karen's face tightened with concern, but she didn't argue. I could hear the unease in her voice as she called after me. "Be careful." I ventured into the woods, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark like a knife. The trees loomed tall and oppressive, their thick branches twisting in the wind. The underbrush was dense and the ground uneven, but I pressed on, the scream echoing in my mind. It was like it was drawing me in, guiding me deeper into the forest. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself didn't want me to go any farther. The scream grew fainter, then stopped altogether. I paused, scanning the darkness, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I turned slowly in every direction, trying to sense any movement or sign of life. My flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows against the trees. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt a strange, unsettling pressure around me, like something was watching me, waiting. I shook off the feeling and began retracing my steps, hoping to find my way back to the campfire. The darkness felt alive now, creeping in, pressing down. The trail I'd walked seemed to shift, like I had wandered off the path without realizing it. The once familiar woods had become a labyrinth of twisted trees and shifting shadows. It was then I realized something. I couldn't remember where I had come from. My heart began to race. Had I been going in circles? The more I tried to remember the direction back, the more disoriented I became. The moon was barely visible through the thick canopy, and the forest had swallowed all traces of the path. I called out, trying to steady my breath. "Karen?" My voice barely broke the silence, swallowed whole by the woods. There was no reply, just the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Panic began to claw at the edges of my mind. The forest seemed endless, and with each step, I felt further away from my family. My flashlight flickered again, its light waning like it was about to die. But just as I started to feel truly lost, I saw it, the faintest glow in the distance, the campfire. It was small, barely visible through the trees, but I saw it, just the flicker of a flame. Without thinking, I pushed forward, desperate to get back. I stumbled through the underbrush, ignoring the branches that scraped at my skin, the sharp rocks digging into my shoes. When I finally burst through the trees, expecting to see the familiar sight of my tent and family, the world stopped. My stomach twisted into knots. The camp was in chaos. The tent was slashed open, the fabric shredded like it had been torn by claws or something far worse. I rushed forward, my heart hammering in my chest. But the worst part? My family was gone. Karen and the kids, Ellie and Jack, had vanished without a trace. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had they left without me? But why would they? They wouldn't have just left the fire burning like that. And why was the tent destroyed, as though someone had been searching through it? My mind raced as I frantically called out, "Karen, Ellie, Jack?" There was no answer. Suddenly, I heard something. The sound of an engine. I turned, spinning around, desperately looking for any sign of movement. And then I saw it, a figure in the distance, driving our truck. It was Karen, her face drawn and pale, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. The kids were in the back of the truck, looking terrified, their eyes wide and unblinking. She slammed the brakes as she reached me, the tires kicking up dust. She didn't even wait for me to say anything before she blurted out, "Two men, they came out of the woods after you left. They didn't say a word. They just stared at us." Her voice shook with fear, and I could see the terror in her eyes. I grabbed the kids and we left. I didn't know what else to do. The words barely made sense, but the horror in her voice was enough to make my blood run cold. She was right. There had been something wrong, something unnatural about the whole night. We didn't waste another second. We got in the truck and sped out of there, heading straight to town. When we reported the incident to the police, they found nothing. No sign of the two men, no evidence of any struggle. Just footprints in the dirt. But when they checked the area around the campsite, the officers said something strange had been happening there for years. A sort of disappearing act that no one could explain. We never went back, and I still wondered, what did we encounter out there? Who were those men? Were they even human? The journey to safety, or so we thought. The drive out of the woods felt like an eternity. The engine hummed beneath us, the road unyielding and narrow, winding through the trees that now seemed to close in, as though they were watching us leave. Karen's hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I could see her glancing in the rearview mirror, her eyes darting back and forth, as though she were afraid someone or something was following us. The kids, Ellie and Jack, sat huddled in the back seat, their faces ghostly pale. They didn't speak, their silence heavier than any words could be. I wanted to ask them what they had seen, what they had felt while I was lost in the woods, but I couldn't bring myself to break the suffocating quiet. What could I possibly say? How could I even begin to explain what we'd just encountered? The whole world felt of. How could I even begin to explain what we'd just encountered? The whole world felt off, like it had shifted into something darker, more sinister. We didn't stop until we hit the small town at the edge of the forest. The streets were empty, the town eerily quiet, for a place so close to a popular camping spot. It was as if the life had been sucked out of it. We made our way to the police station, hoping to find answers, but the officers just nodded solemnly when we told them about the two men, those strange, silent figures who had come out of the woods. They didn't seem surprised. They didn't even blink. That area is known for unusual occurrences, the officer said, his voice low, as though he didn't want anyone to overhear. We get reports from time to time about strange sightings, people going missing for hours, then turning up again with no memory of what happened. You're not the first. The words hung in the air like a weight, suffocating the little hope we had left. He didn't offer us any help, no explanation, just a blank stare. After a while, we left, but the nagging sense that something wasn't right had only deepened. That night, Karen and I tried to sleep, but the memories of the woods, of the figures in the distance, haunted me. The coldness of the air, the unnatural silence, it all felt wrong. I kept hearing that scream in my mind, that desperate cry that had led me deep into the woods. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to return. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by the sound of scratching at the window. My heart leapt in my chest, and I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I could hear Karen breathing softly beside me, but the scratching sound, it was unmistakable. It was coming from outside, just beneath the window. I got up slowly, my feet cold against the floorboards, and crept toward the window. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my hands were trembling as I slowly pulled back the curtain. There, in the dim light, I saw nothing, but the air outside felt thick, like the very world had shifted again. I closed the curtain, but as I turned to go back to bed, I heard it, a whisper, a voice, barely audible, calling my name. I froze, my blood running cold. I knew that voice. It was Karen's voice, but it sounded wrong, twisted. I turned back toward her, but she was still asleep, her chest rising and falling with each breath. It was then I realized the voice wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from outside, from the very woods we had left behind. The days that followed were even worse. No matter where we went, the feeling of being followed never left. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw movement in the corners of my vision. Figures standing just out of reach, watching us from the shadows. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a result of the trauma we'd experienced. But the unease grew, and soon I couldn't tell what was real anymore. One evening, we took a walk through town to clear our heads. The streets were empty, the stores closed early, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. The trees lining the town seemed to loom larger, their branches hanging low, casting long, twisted shadows on the pavement. As we walked, I heard the distinct crunch of footsteps behind us. I turned quickly, but again, there was nothing. Just the empty street, the wind stirring the leaves. Karen noticed my agitation. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. Her voice was strained, like she was holding back tears. "It's like they're still out there, still watching us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, we kept walking, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that followed us like a shadow. As we neared the edge of town, the air grew colder, the silence deeper. The last house in the street was dark, its windows covered, as if it had been abandoned for years. Then, without warning, the sound of heavy breathing filled the air. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't from any animal. The sound was human, ragged, labored, like someone struggling to breathe after a long chase. We both froze, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The only sound was the steady rhythm of that breath. Then we heard it. A soft thump, something heavy hitting the ground. My heart nearly stopped. The breath came closer, closer, until it was right behind us. I spun around, ready to confront whatever was there. But again, nothing. Just empty space. But something was different now. The feeling that had been building inside of me, that sense of being followed, was now unmistakable. Something was watching us from the shadows. Something that wasn't human. We ran. We didn't even look back. I grabbed Karen's hand, and we sprinted toward the nearest building, toward the only source of light in the growing darkness. Behind us, the breathing continued, getting closer, echoing in the stillness of the night. It was chasing us. We made it back to our motel room, slamming the door behind us, locking it with shaking hands. But even then, we couldn't escape. The air inside the room felt suffocating, the walls closing in. I could still hear the breathing, now muffled but relentless, as if it were right outside the door, waiting for the right moment to strike. We stayed in that room, huddled together, unable to sleep, terrified to even close our eyes. The night passed slowly, the darkness pressing in on us from all sides. And when the sun finally rose, it brought no comfort. The town was still eerily quiet, and the feeling that something was lurking just beyond our reach never left. Weeks passed, and we tried to return to normal life, but the terror of that camping trip never faded. We couldn't escape the feeling that the woods were still calling to us, that something was waiting for us out there, just beyond the trees. We moved to a new town, tried to put everything behind us, but the dream started. But none of us could see who was there. We heard the whispers, but no one was there. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing, sweat soaking my clothes. I ran to the window, yanked it open, and peered into the night. The trees were too close. The woods stretched out beyond the yard, their dark branches clawing at the sky. Then I saw something, a figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, standing motionless by the edge of the woods. For a moment, I thought it was just my imagination, until it moved. It wasn't the slow, deliberate movements of a person. No, it was unnatural, jerky, as if the figure didn't belong in this world at all. It twisted and stretched unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways they shouldn't have, like the very laws of nature were being warped around it. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the window shut and bolted back to the bed, shaking Karen awake. "Get up! We need to leave. Now!" She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. But before she could respond, the whispers came again. This time, right outside the window. It wasn't the breeze anymore. It was voices, soft and cold, their words garbled and impossible to understand. But one thing was clear. They were calling us. "Don't answer it," Karen whispered, her voice trembling. "They want us to come back, to bring us back to the woods." I nodded, knowing she was right. I could feel it. The woods were calling, pulling at us with a force that I couldn't explain. And the figure, it was waiting, watching, its presence more suffocating than any physical threat. But we didn't leave. We couldn't. I could almost feel them in my ears now, brushing against my skin like 1,000 cold fingers. Then, just when I thought I might lose my mind from the noise, everything stopped. Dead silence. I listened, straining to hear anything, a sound, a breath, anything. But there was nothing. Just the darkness, the absence. It felt like the world had disappeared, leaving only us behind, trapped in a void where time had no meaning. And then, just like that, the figure was there again, right in front of us. It had moved impossibly fast, like it had never been outside the window in the first place. The shape was cloaked in shadows, its face an inky black void, no features, no eyes. It reached out toward us, its hands long and twisted, fingers unnaturally bent, stretching as if to grab us. I froze. The figure outside was still watching, still waiting. But now it wasn't alone. There were others, more figures, creeping just beyond the edge of our yard, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. They were everywhere, watching, waiting for us to make the wrong move. And I knew with a certainty that felt like ice in my veins, that if we stayed, we wouldn't make it out alive. Karen grabbed Jack's hand. Ellie was already at the door, ready to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, frozen in terror. I could hear them, feel them, the creatures, the whispers, the hunger. They were coming for us, all of us, and there was no escape, no way out. Then the lights flickered back on, just for a moment, enough to reveal the figure standing in the doorway. The tall, shadowy figure, its limbs outstretched, its face still an endless void of darkness. But this time, it wasn't alone. The others were behind it, emerging from the darkness like shadows pulling away from the light. It was then that I realized there was no escape. We never made it out of that town. Not really. It doesn't matter how far we ran, how many times we moved. They're always there, watching, waiting. We are still trapped somewhere between the world we know and the one that is coming for us. The woods never let you leave, not really.